The topic of this video focuses on the comparisons between FDR's New Deal of the 1930s and LBJ's Great Society of the 1960s. We will cover the origins, goals, and the legacy of each of these policies. First, let's introduce FDR's policies and the origins of the New Deal. Now, FDR became president as America suffered from the Great Depression. The presidents before him, Coolidge and Hoover, failed to improve the crisis the U.S. was facing. FDR started his presidency off quickly with his first 100 days, in which he introduced his idea of the New Deal. During those first 100 days, FDR worked with his Congress on multiple proposals. Through this, we can start to get a sense of what some of FDR's goals were for the New Deal. FDR's primary focus was something he called the 3 R's, which were relief, reform, and recovery. For recovery, FDR focused on reorganizing the banking system. This included implementing a bank holiday, organizing the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, and the Homeowners Loan Corporation. Reform focused on changing systems to prevent something like the Great Depression from happening again. For example, the Securities and Exchange Commission was put into action in 1934 in order to prevent the market from crashing. FDR also created the NRA and Agricultural Adjustment Act, or AAA. The AAA was extremely helpful for farmers because it lowered the production rate in order to increase the prices of goods. The last R was relief, which focused on lowering the unemployment rate and providing jobs. To do this, FDR created many public works projects, such as the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA. Other relief programs included the Federal Emergency Relief Act, Civilian Conservation Courts, Civil Works Authority, and Works Progress Authority. Now that we have discussed the origins and goals of the New Deal, let's talk about the legacy of FDR's policy. You will notice many of these are still in use to this day. One of FDR's major contributions was Social Security, which is still very common today. He also developed minimum wage laws for employees. He created public works projects, such as the TVA, to lower the unemployment rate. FDR also provided a lot of focus on the environment and getting laws passed to keep the environment safe and secure during an urbanizing era. One of the most important things FDR did through the New Deal was increase federal government involvement. Since Reconstruction, the U.S. government has been following a laissez-faire policy, keeping hands off from U.S. troubles. FDR changed that. Clearly, he was very involved in the New Deal and got the government back and involved with American citizens. Now, let's turn our attention to Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. Now, ironically, Johnson was a huge fan of FDR, and his Great Society idea was modeled after FDR's New Deal. However, there are a fair amount of differences between the two political agendas. For example, as the New Deal was called forth due to the drastic economic crisis, the Great Society, although an economic aid, originated mostly because of the Civil Rights Movement. Many African Americans were calling on the government to give them economic equality, and that was one of the major goals for Johnson. Along with the goals of supporting civil rights, particularly desegregating education, Johnson also hoped to create a welfare state, lower unemployment, support the arts, and expand FDR's policies he originated in the New Deal. As far as legacies of the Great Society go, it depends on whom you talk to. There are obviously some clear improvements, such as the Elementary and Secondary Education Acts, along with the Head Start program, the Medicare and Medicaid development, and the Civil Rights Acts that Johnson passed. However, some will argue that Johnson was unable to win the war on poverty, one of his major goals. Some will argue that Johnson misunderstood what was happening in the ghettos where the war on poverty was taking place and did not respond to it effectively. Many believe that the money Johnson invested in the ghettos actually increased the drug and crime rate. Johnson's Great Society may in some ways have also taken away the people's incentive to work, since the government would help support you if you were unemployed. There are some people that took advantage of that instead of going out and working hard to boost their economy. A final comparison between the New Deal and the Great Society is the effect of war on each policy. FDR led the U.S. into World War II, and Johnson had the Vietnam War passed on to him after Kennedy was killed. Because of the demand for resources during World War II, many jobs were made increasingly available and gave workers that were unemployed during the Great Depression jobs again in order to support the military. Although the U.S. was very much affected by World War II, the war actually helped FDR solidify his goals for improving the economy before the end of his presidency. For Johnson, however, the war was his downfall. The Vietnam War was an extremely costly war, financially and in the lives of the soldiers. By the end of Johnson's presidency, he had over 500,000 soldiers in Vietnam. The war increasingly displeased the American people, and by the 1968 presidential election, huge protests were occurring across the country. In January 1968, the Tet Offensive occurred, showing that the war was far from over and that Johnson was not leading his country well in Vietnam. Johnson ended up withdrawing from the presidential race soon after in March of 1968. The New Deal and the Great Society were two of the most influential political policies a president has ever proposed. Each were helpful in boosting the economy, cleaning the environment, providing equality among Americans, and increasing the federal government involvement.